Tyler, can I confess something kind of shameful to you?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, but don't laugh, all right?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I would, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you know how I've always been really athletic and I play a lot of different sports, and I'm always right-handed, okay? I
Hmm.
golf right-handed, I swing the bat right-handed, whatever I'm doing, I throw right-handed.
Yeah.
When I play hockey, though, I shoot left-handed. I really do.
Whoa. Okay,
I
wait,
know.
wait, wait. Wait. So you use your left hand as the dominant one when playing hockey?
Yeah, I'm just as good shooting left-handed as I am right-handed, and in fact, I maybe even prefer shooting left-handed.
Yeah. Well, that's quite freakish, but
I know. I know.
I do have a confession of my own.
Okay. Is it worse than mine?
I think so. When I was first learning how to write,
Hmm.
then I would just use either hand.
Either hand?
Yeah, sometimes I would use my right, sometimes I would use my left. But I mean, it wasn't like I was equally good with each. It was more that I was equally bad with each.
Hmm. Most shameful kind of being ambidextrous.
Yeah, yeah. I had two non-dominant hands rather than two dominant hands.
That's actually a true story.
It really is.
Two non-dominant hands. If only I had a third hand that was good at anything.
Yep. I eventually just picked one. People told me, just pick a hand. Which one should I pick? It doesn't matter.
You're so bad with either one. We don't care. We don't care. Yeah. Well, like the crazy thing is that there's like historically, as far as I understand, it was a pretty common thing for teachers to force left-handed kids to write with their hand because being left-handed was just wrong. It was, whether it's the
Right.
sinister hand or it's just, well, that's not what most people do, so become like most people, which you would think would be very difficult for, naturally left-handed people to have to do.
Right. Yep.
Being ambidextrous, the most shameful thing of all. Being
Yeah,
terrible.
I would have had to work twice as hard to be as good as everyone else.
Right, right. Hello and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
If you are new to the series, we are reading through all of the series of unfortunate events books. This is the Carnivorous Carnival, book the ninth by Lemony Snicket, really by Daniel Handler. And what we're doing is we are doing 3 videos for each book in the series, producing weekly videos. And so we're breaking up each book into 3 different parts. So chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13. And I have not read the series before, so this is my first time. But Tyler, you read this as a middle grade reader.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do understand that we do have a sponsor for this week's episode.
Yeah, we sure do. We sure do. So our sponsor is the Tagliatelle Grande noodle. Listen, folks, you might be thinking that it's hard to manage an office of employees. And what you've got to do is you have got to get yourself a Tagliatelle Grande noodle. Let me just get the ad copy right here.
Hmm.
So this is a type of Italian noodle. It is a big noodle that what you need to do is you need to swing this over your head, and your subordinates are going to hear a limp swishing sound as it moves slowly through the air, as if a large earthworm were crawling nearby. You're gonna go out and get a giant noodle, bring it into the workplace, and folks swing your giant earthworm noodle around as it makes a limp, swishing sound, and that's how you're gonna keep your subordinates in place. It is the most effective way to manage an office in the 21st century. You will not get in trouble with HR at all. The company guarantees it. Tagliatelle Grande noodles. Get yours today to swing it in public.
Absolutely. That is such a great sponsor. So happy to be able to talk about them on the podcast.
Me too. This may be the best ad read I've ever done. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are looking at chapters 1 to 4 in the Carnivorous Carnival, book the 9th, and Tyler, you have got plot summary duty for the week.
Yes. So we pick up at the beginning of this story where we left off in the previous one with the Baudelaire orphans in the trunk of Olaf's car. They are overhearing the associates talking about their plans, and they arrive at Caligari Carnival, which is a nice little reference to the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and the Baudelaires want to, of course, stay hidden. They are still being hunted by the police, and they are also being hunted by Olaf and his associates. And now they have Madame Lulu, who can apparently see not necessarily into the future, but can just see things in her crystal ball, right? And so they want to stick around long enough to find out about where their potentially surviving relative, their surviving parent is. So they don disguising themselves as carnies, as Sunny puts it, or freaks, as is the chief description of these characters here. So they disguise themselves, Violet and Klaus, as a two-headed person, and Sunny as a wolf baby. They I don't think there's much else. Like, that's the gist of what happens in these chapters.
Yeah.
They're in disguise. They perform for eight or nine people.
Yeah, and the thing is, they find out, they overhear from one of Olaf's comrades that one of their parents is indeed still alive, at least according to Madame Lulu, and that they are trying to get into her office to figure out how she knows the things that she knows, and to eavesdrop on her when she's talking to Olaf to figure out all of, the information that she has about the Baudelaire fire, the files, the surviving parent potentially, and where they might be in all of that stuff. But yeah, so they're basically killing time because they don't know what else to do. So yeah, they're performing as freaks right now.
Yes, and Madame Lulu was the one who had provided Olaf with the information as to where the Baudelaires were going to be going all this time. So we get that little explanation. But she can only answer one question per day, which is part of the time killing here.
Yes, exactly. And there's also this agreement that she's going to get a big part of the fortune once he captures them and acquires their fortune. And she is, at least so far, there's indications that she's frustrated that she has been doing all of this and she's not getting paid anything. But there's just a whole bunch of people in this book universe who don't get paid anything at all. There's a lot of people who just have no salary and they're just basically getting, room and board.
Right.
Just enough to not die. But
yeah, I don't know why the people who work for Olaf work for him.
Yeah, you've got the people who work for Olaf, you've got the people working in the carnival, like the other, freaks as they're called. You get the people in the miserable mill who are working for coupons.
And gum.
And gum. I apologize. And gum. Yeah, there is a lot of people who are just working for room and board.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. It does seem to be a Depression era.
That's interesting.
Yeah. with all these orphans and everything too, then I think that it's reminiscent of that at the very least. Of like the depression or of just, hard times in general. For this community.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to think on that. All right, let's get into the actual book. So chapter 1, and I guess maybe I'll go first.
Okay.
All right, so before we even get into the text of chapter 1, the illustration that you have just before that, so I guess that's on page -1, -2, right. Depending on whether you paginate 0 as a page. So you've got this illustration where it says Madame Lulu at the Caligari Carnival. And so, first of all, that is a reference to the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Have you seen this movie?
I haven't seen all of it. I've seen at least portions of it.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why. I mean, I've seen it at least once, if not twice. For anybody who's unfamiliar, I'm pretty sure it's from 1927, but I could be wrong. But it's a silent film. It's one of the best examples of German expressionism, and so where the actual setting matches the character's psyche, and so things like distorted shapes and things like that. But it's also considered to be perhaps the first zombie film, and I am something of an expert on this zombie genre, and so I'm familiar with it for that reason. But to me, it's in a lot of ways like a pure zombie film, or at least closer to a pure zombie film than what you get with a lot of them. Because technically, being a zombie it has to be a voodoo priest who raises the person from the dead. It's not supposed to be passed on by biting, but it's supposed to, that's the original concept or mythology of zombieism, is that a voodoo priest raises a single person from the dead, and then that person terrorizes people. But if they bite you, it's not contagious. Right. It's the person came back because of the voodoo priest. But I don't know. I think there's something to this aside from just, hey, that was a cool movie from the 1920s and a great early horror film. I think it's, having people act as avatars, because we already had that with Klaus, where he gets hypnotized and essentially he became a type of zombie in the Miserable Mill.
Right. Yeah.
With this eye, that he goes to the optometrist and then he gets hypnotized and thus turning him into a type of zombie. Because in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the zombie takes orders from the person who raises him from the dead and instructs him to do certain things. Yeah. It's not just a terrorizing monster, but it's essentially acting as his avatar.
Yeah, the other thing, Dr. Caligari does start, or at least toward the beginning of the film, it picks up in a carnival.
Yes.
So
yeah,
there is that connection.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's an even more direct connection. Yeah. The other thing too is on that same page with the illustration, then it doesn't actually get mentioned in the text of it, but on the billboard, then it says, "What you want to hear, guaranteed," which is just such a funny thing for some kind of fortune teller to advertise, because a lot of people, say that's basically what they do, is they read body language and different cues like that in order to figure out what it is that you want to hear, and then they tease it out of you and then slowly reveal it, so then you feel happy with your fortune. Right. But then that's also playing off of this whole thing of essentially the instructions that Lulu gives to everyone at the carnival, which is give people whatever they want.
Yeah.
Which I don't have a specific note for that, so I guess just generally speaking, I just wanted to mention that is essentially what entertainment does, and what some people will criticize pop entertainment of doing. Then they'll say that's a bad thing, that's not art. Art is challenging people, but pop art or pop entertainment just gives people something that's fun and satisfying and whatever they want, but it demands nothing of them. It doesn't force them to confront, misassumptions that they've maybe had about the human experience or about the world, or to force them to think about something in a different way. It's just so purely pleasurable, where it's just, like from The Simpsons, like coming up on Fox when buildings fall over, and it's like the best part was when the building
Yeah.
fell over, and it's just like an hour of buildings falling over. It's just shallow, purely entertaining drivel.
Yeah.
And she's essentially advocating for that. And then you do get that criticism of pop art and pop entertainment like that. So I don't know what to make of it other than it's an interesting insertion that we have into this book.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I think it'll come up again later in the story. But yeah, no, it is a good note there.
Yeah. All right. And then on page 10, then you have another creepy moment from Olaf in regards to Violet.
Yep.
And so they're talking about we only need one of them alive to get the fortune. This is the middle of page 10. I hope it's sunny, the hook-handed man said. It was fun putting her in a cage, and I look forward to doing it again, because of course he did that in the first book. And then this is Olaf. I myself hope it's Violet, Olaf said. She's the prettiest, which is so creepy. He wants her to be alive because she's the prettiest.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, I'm sure in comparison to a 12-year-old boy and an infant, yes, Violet is the prettiest, but
yeah.
Why is that the reason that you want her to be the one who stays alive? What is it that, like, if you hate them and if you want their fortune, who cares whether she's pretty or not, other than this dude having some other interest in her? Aside from her fortune, which is not the first time that we've seen this in these books. And it's, I don't like the fact that it's in here in the way that it's in here, because it doesn't set him up as being particularly villainous. Like, you don't even really get, like, some comment from Esme, like, what's that supposed to mean? Or
right.
You know what I mean? And she's supposed to be his girlfriend. She says, I don't care who it is. I just want to know where they are. But she doesn't say, I hope it's not her. Like, because I know what you're thinking, Olaf. That it's just kind of dropped in there.
Yeah.
He thinks that she's pretty, and what is he considering? But it's not posed as being villainous necessarily.
Right. Yeah, there's not even the mention of like a shudder from Violet or anything.
Right.
Which would at least give a little bit of context there.
I know. That's the thing, is that it doesn't, it's dropped in there like it's just some other 14-year-old boy who maybe has a beef with the Baudelaires, but still has a crush on Violet. Why does this middle-aged dude have a crush on Violet? And how is it that nobody else is calling him out for this?
Yeah.
And that he's comfortable just talking about it is just, it's strange. All right, moving on to page 21. So I figured that you probably have this marked as well, but you get this whole backstory here, and it's a pretty organic way of reminding readers who have read the other books what's happened so far, or informing them, because you've done a good job of pointing out the instances where we have this in chapter 1. I think it's always been in chapter 1, but maybe there's been cases where it's been later on in like chapter 2. But basically Violet tries to make a collect call to Mr. Poe, but there doesn't seem to be a thing as collect calls, so she's just trying to get through to him by saying that it's an emergency, and then, well, what's the emergency? And then she just spews out as succinctly as possible everything that's happened to them. But really the function of that is to remind the reader who has read the books what's happened before, or to inform a reader who maybe has not read all of the books what has happened so far in the series.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's a good plot device.
Yep. I did indeed have that marked as well.
I figured, but I thought I'd mention it anyway.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any other notes for chapter 1?
That was it.
All right. Let me see. So on page 2, we do have the reference to the belly of the beast, page 1 into page 2. But I like the way that Lemony Snicket has described this. But I always insist that the most frightening part of any beast is its belly, for the simple reason that if you are seeing the belly of the beast, it means you have already seen the teeth of the beast and the claws of the beast, and even the hair of the beast, and now you are trapped and there is probably no hope for you. Yeah, I just really enjoy that
Yeah.
description of it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good one. I'm glad you brought that up because that's pretty funny. Because it's very much a Douglas Adams way of describing something, from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah,
Have you read those books?
I have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like, you remember, like, I think it's in the first one, then he talks about, like going into, I don't know, whatever it is, hyperspace or hyperdrive, right? Then he's like, oh, like, he's like, you got to be careful, though, because it's really uncomfortable. He's like, oh, what does it feel like? He said, it's a bit like being drunk. And he's like, well, that doesn't sound that bad. And he's like, oh, really? Ask a glass of water.
Right.
Right? And it's like, oh, that kind of to be drunk, as in somebody drinks you and then you're going through that whole system, is very much Douglas Adams type of joke.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I like it.
absolutely. All right. Actually, yeah, on page 11, that was just my reference to Madame Lulu being the reason for them always knowing where the Baudelaires are going to go, which is an interesting explanation. I like that there is some kind of explanation, even if we're not quite sure how it is that Madame Lulu knows all of this.
Right. Yeah, we don't know how she knows, but we do get a sense of there's at least it's at least nodding in some direction that there is an explanation. I won't tell you what it is, but I'll tell you that there is some reason why he's able to figure out where they are.
Yeah. And then my last note for chapter 1 is on page 18, just at the top of the page, when Sonny says, "Dragnet," Sonny said, which meant, "But the police think we're murderers," which is a fun reference to the TV series.
Right. Right. And the actual act of putting out a dragnet,
Right, yes.
like the police do.
Yes.
All right, that was
Good one.
great. All right, chapter 2. Why don't you go first?
Sure. Great. So my first note here is on page 31. Um, yeah, so I'm just going to read this. The top paragraph there. You said that about the. Actually, yeah, I should start at the bottom of page 30. "I've told you before," Olaf said, "once we get the Baudelaire fortune, the carnival will have plenty of money." "You said that about Quagmire fortune, my Olaf," Madame Lulu said, "and about Snicket fortune, but never a penny does Madame Lulu see." So apparently, the Snicket family also has a fortune, and yeah, that's interesting to note. We did already know that has an occasional manservant, as is
Mm-hmm.
described in one of the author descriptions, but this reference to there actually being a fortune is interesting. I'm not quite sure if that is, referring to something that is happening at this time, um, or like around this time with, because as we know, Lemony Snicket and Jacques Snicket were about the same age as the Baudelaire parents. So
Yes.
Olaf wouldn't be stealing a fortune from children unless he's stealing it from the children of Jacques or Lemony.
Right. Right. And there's no indication that Lemony Snicket has had any children. He hasn't
Yeah.
mentioned anything like that. It
Yeah.
is a strange thing. Um, it does kind of explain why Lemony Snicket is on the run the way he is and why he feels compelled to tell the story of the Baudelaires. But the other thing too that seems interesting to me is if Olaf is actually has managed to acquire the Quagmire fortune and the Snicket fortune, but he's still working on the Baudelaire fortune, then either he is completely selfish and he's just not sharing it with any of the people who have helped him to acquire the fortune, right? Um, it's that, or he hasn't actually acquired the fortune, even though he's killed off their parents or, turned them into orphans and sent them on the run and all of that. So either he's done it, but he's just kept it to himself.
Right.
Because he's selfish, he hasn't acquired it at all, or he is somehow getting access to the fortune, but he just doesn't care about the money. He just likes turning children into orphans.
Mm,
That, you know what I mean? And he's
yeah.
like, I don't know. It's strange that he's not sharing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, like the reference to the Quagmire fortune, then as far as we know, he does not have it because the Quagmires are still alive. They are
Right.
aboard the. Um,
Yeah, theirs is still in escrow.
yeah.
So it doesn't really make sense. Like, if that's what she's saying, but then isn't it just kind of a case of, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. That I
Yeah.
guess he's just he's failed in acquiring the Quagmire fortune, and maybe
I
he's
think that's it.
failed in acquiring the Snicket fortune.
Yeah, I believe that's it. And that, Madame Lulu keeps helping him, but is seeing no return for all the work that she is doing for him.
But it's like he says, I've told you before, once we get the Baudelaire fortune, the carnival will have plenty of money. And then you said that about Quagmire fortune, my Olaf, and about Snicket fortune. So you said once we have it. So then it kind of implies from that, the phrasing, that
Right.
he has acquired it, but she still isn't seeing any money from
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm getting puzzled over this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a good point. Um, at the very least, then I think it implies that he is no longer pursuing either the Quagmire fortune or the Snicket fortune.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it at least does that.
Yeah. And actually, that was my only note for chapter two.
Oh, okay. I think I've got a fair number in two, but not much for the rest of the chapters for three or four. So at the very beginning of chapter two on page 25,
Mhm.
so this is the second time that we've heard this type of advice where he says eavesdropping, a word here which means listening in on interesting conversations you're not invited to join, is a valuable thing to do, and it is often an enjoyable thing to do, but it is not a polite thing to do, and like most impolite things, you're bound to get into trouble if you get caught doing it. So he doesn't say, and like most impolite things to do, you should not do it. He's just going,
Right.
you're going to get in trouble if you get caught. In other
Yeah.
words, don't get caught. And um, so we heard this before with the reptile room. Then he
Hmm.
said, hey kids, I know that you love, eavesdropping, and it's a fun thing to do and all of this stuff, and you've done this to your parents, but you don't want to get caught. And then he essentially gives them a trick of how to not get caught, like
Right.
put something on the floor, and then if somebody comes out, then bend down like you had just dropped it, that's why you're standing there, and pick it up, and
Mhm.
then just keep moving on your merry way. And so there's this assumption about the ethics in children, and it's just like, oh yeah, no, that's perfectly fine to do this impolite thing to do. Like, isn't society all uptight because they don't like you eavesdropping? So just make sure you don't get caught.
Right.
uh, and then he continues on with this on page 36. So um, on page 36, I'll just go from towards the top of that page. This is Violet who's speaking. She says, let's look through the disguises, Violet said, and see if we get any ideas. We'll have to feel through them, Klaus said. It's too dark to look through anything. And then the Baudelaire stood in front of the open trunk and reached inside to begin their search. As I'm sure you know, whenever you are examining someone else's belongings, you are bound to learn many interesting things about the person of which you were not previously aware. And then he gives, and this one's a relevant example. You might examine some letters your sister received recently, for instance, and learn that she was planning on running away with an archduke. So you've maybe opened up, you found your sister's diary, and you've read in there about some boy at school that she likes, or some guy who kissed her, or something like that, or something that she's keeping from her parents, some like from your parents, some kind of secret that, as I'm sure you know, right?
Right.
It's fun to rifle through other people's things. Just starting with that assumption that you do this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so anyway, it's this assumption that children are sneaks, but there's no judgment here. He's not chastising them for this at all.
Yes. Yeah, I do think that there's a bit of a not necessarily a word of warning, but just an interesting turn with the Third example that he gives, I recently looked in the refrigerator of one of my enemies and learned she was a vegetarian, or at least pretending to be one, or had a vegetarian visiting her for a few days. So there is this, sense of just because you see something in a suitcase doesn't, or in, somebody's items doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. That, yeah.
There
So,
is that you don't want to jump to conclusions about what it could possibly mean,
yeah,
but there's no judgment over the desire to do this or the
for
act
sure.
of doing it. Not even the desire, but actually, sifting through somebody else's possessions,
Yeah.
their private stuff. And there's no criticism there. And this is one of those instances where I feel like that if parents did read these books before allowing their kids to read it, like that would be an instance where they would say, I don't like that. Um,
Right.
Not so much, I don't want you to read a book about, like, where there's violence and like, there's murders and there's, these kids are living in miserable circumstances, but it's more, he's not even going to correct you. He's just going to say it's a totally normal thing to do. So then kids might pick up on that and go, "Oh, this is a perfectly normal desire to go through somebody else's stuff. What's
Right.
the problem?"
As long as you don't get caught.
Right, as long as you don't get caught. Um, and I think, okay, that yeah, okay, so that basically covers that section. And then, like I say, I've got most of my notes in chapter 2 here, so just be patient with me.
Mhm.
On page 40, then this is towards the bottom of the page, starting with the paragraph that says it was cruel. Um, so actually, I'll go one paragraph before that. So it says, why would people want to look at someone with birth defects? Violet asked. It sounds cruel. It was cruel, Klaus said. The crowd often threw things at Mr. Merrick and called him names. I'm afraid the House of Freaks isn't a very pleasant form of entertainment. You'd think someone would put a stop to it, Violet said, but you'd think somebody would put a stop to Count Olaf too, and nobody does. So, in a lot of ways, these books are coming of age stories and realizing that, like, a Bildungsroman in that sense, a coming of age novel, but the idea that these kids are learning some of the harsh lessons of the adult world, especially in this chapter so far, then it's kind of interesting. You got it a little bit in the last book too, where they start doing some things where they're like, oh, maybe we're like Olaf because we're lying and we're disguising ourselves
Yeah.
and we're doing unethical things. And maybe there's a little bit more gray to ethics than we initially thought, like our
Mhm.
childish view of this is right, this is wrong, instead of going, ooh, it's actually more complex than that. And this of realizing like, oh, there's forms of entertainment in the world that are pretty cruel and people don't stop it, and it's like, oh, there's just actually a lot of cruelty that goes on in the world and it doesn't get stopped because children, very much, many children have a very strong sense of justice. That's why they're
Right.
complaining all the time. That's why they tattle all the time. They want their friends or their sibling to get in trouble if they do one tiny little thing wrong, and they like to see their friends get in trouble, but they don't necessarily want to get in trouble themselves. But it's this
Yeah.
idea of, the world is supposed to be a certain way, and they get very angry if they feel like justice has not been meted out perfectly. And
Right.
it's just one of those things of like, sorry, kid, but get used to it. The world is not a fair place. There is cruelty, there is injustice that goes on all the time. And you essentially have to pick your battles and try to make the world a better place. But if you think the world's ever going to be a perfect place, you're going to have a very miserable existence.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, very, very true. Um, and yeah, on the note, about uh, children wanting to get others in trouble, part of that, of course, is that, and Violet and Klaus discuss this, um, where it is, why am I getting in trouble for something, but they didn't get in trouble for that?
Yeah,
It's that mentality of,
it is.
this is unfair, that one person is being treated one way and another is being treated another way just because they didn't get caught, or you know
Yeah,
because of certain unknown circumstances.
that is exactly it. And I will say that that is one of the biggest reasons why I have chosen no longer to teach grades 7 and 8, because I cannot handle that. Because seventh graders do that all the time. You try to correct somebody in class and they're like, why didn't you stop them when they were talking? Why don't you do this when they were? And I'm going, I'm talking to you right now. Like, just you need to be better. Like,
Yeah.
I'll deal with each one individually, but it's that sense of justice of, like, I mean, like, that can't be a defense in a court of law. You can't
Right.
say, well, like, there was a person who murdered those people over there and they're not on trial. And it's like, because we don't know who it was. Like, that's not a defense of what you did. But kids
Right.
want that. They want to, like, it's a sense of being a victim in, you know, getting in trouble. Of, if everybody else hasn't gotten in the exact same amount of trouble that I'm in right now, then this is an unjust form of punishment, which is just a childish view of the world. And so these kids are starting to learn this, which is, it's a tough lesson to learn, but it's a helpful one.
Yeah.
All right. Then on page 42, this is just a quick note here, where the middle of the page, it says, the makeup kit will take care of that, Violet said. Mother taught me how to draw fake scars on myself when she appeared in that play about the murderer. So their mother was an actress.
Very interesting.
That's a new one, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm going,
I didn't even like really pick up on that.
I at first sped past it, then I went, wait, the mother was an actress, not, because you keep hearing about all these, like, you know what I mean? I was thinking like maybe Snicket or like Esme or something, because it's acting is the connection that constantly goes back to Olaf.
Yeah.
So then, and a play about a murderer, that sounds like something that Olaf would be interested in putting on as a performance. So I'm going, is that how Olaf first came to know the Baudelaires? Because their mother maybe was in this community production of some play that Olaf was a part of or was putting on, and that's how he came to find out, oh, she's this wealthy socialite who, you know, has got 3 kids. They have this big mansion. What if I take her out? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm gonna have to think on that. That is really fascinating because yeah, I did not pick up on that
Yeah,
at
it's
all.
not just, you know, mother like was in a play. It's mother taught me how to draw fake scars on myself when she appeared in that play about the murderer. It's a play about a murderer. And I guess the other thing too that you could read into this as well, if one of the parents is alive, then their mother apparently is really good at disguises and with makeup and
Yeah,
could be disguising herself as somebody else to try to keep Olaf from finding her.
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Huh.
All right.
Okay.
Moving on. So this is page 48. So this is, let me just read the second full sentence on that page because it's this giant paragraph that we have here. So it says, but the siblings could scarcely remember when they'd been able to relax and do the things they'd like to do best. It seemed ages since Violet had been able to sit around and think of inventions instead of frantically building something to get them out of trouble. Klaus could barely remember the last book he had read for his own enjoyment, instead of as research to defeat one of Olaf's schemes, and Sunny had used her teeth many, many times to escape from difficult situations, but it had been quite a while since she had bitten something recreationally. Okay, so my point here is, it seems like they are having the experience of maturing and entering the world of work. And that they're realizing the hobbies and interests, the passions that I've had in the past, I no longer have time to pursue those interests, and all I do is work. That's what
Right.
they're talking about. And like
Yeah.
anybody who like, it happens to, I would say, most people, not all people, but most people who, oh, like kids will sometimes think when I'm a grown up and I don't have to go to school, life is going to become so much easier. And then
Right.
occasionally you'll have kind of a cruel adult who will then explain, no, life is going to get much, much worse. You
Right.
know what I mean? Of like, yeah, the school day is not nearly as long as the work day. And
Right.
you don't have to worry about a commute. And you don't make your own lunch, and you probably don't make your own breakfast. And then when you're finished work after doing a much longer day, where it's going to be work that's not enjoyable. It's not creative the way it is in elementary school, where you get to draw a picture of whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like for silent reading time, whatever book you want to read, none of that will happen. And there's going to be no recess. And then on top of that, you're going to go home much later in the day and you're going to have to go grocery shopping, and then you're going to have to make dinner, and then you're going to have to do the dishes. And if you have children, then there's going to be a whole bunch of chores associated with that as well. And you're barely going to have any time in the day whatsoever. And what money you do have, you're not going to really be able to spend on passions and pursuits and interests. Instead, it's going to go to bills and spending money on stuff that you would never spend money on as a kid. Like, I'm going to spend money on brake pads. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yep.
And so that's like, and then you do that until you're old and decrepit and you just wait for death. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's not so fun.
Yeah.
And so they're starting to realize, like, this sucks. We've got all these interests and passions, but we can't pursue them. And it's just one of these things of, I think most people experience this as they get older. Of realizing I'm not going to have more time to pursue these things. I'm in fact going to have less free time the older I get. Because then it jumps into, and this is still on the same point, and that was my last point with chapter 2, but I just wanted to mention this with chapter 3. It continues on with this experience of entering the world of work at the beginning of chapter 3, where it says, besides getting several paper cuts in the same day or receiving the news that someone in your family has betrayed you to your enemies, one of the most unpleasant experiences in life is a job interview. It is very nerve-wracking to explain to someone all the things you can do in the hopes that they will pay you to do them. And then he goes on giving like some humorous examples of, job interviews. But this is more evidence that this is what it's like for the kids. And I think it's interesting because this book is certainly the longest of the series so far. They continue to get longer from here on out. If kids have aged up with the series, where they maybe started reading when they were, a middle grade reader, and now they're getting closer to young adult, like if they're closer to Violet's age of 14, 15 years old, that legitimately is the time for many teenagers to start applying to part-time jobs after school and on the weekend. And then it's like, oh, I'm older, so now I can get a job where I can earn money to spend like however I want. And it's like, yeah, except your time is now going to be occupied with school, and you're going to have homework, and your grades are going to count a lot more because this is now getting ready for college. And then what free time you still have that's left in your schedule, you're going to spend at a part-time job, and forget about spending it on just whatever you want. College is really expensive. So you're going to have to save some of that money for college, or to get a car, to make your life a little bit easier. But that also just adds a lot of costs to your life. And so it's one of these things of going, their life isn't getting better, and in part it's because they're getting older. And they had this juvenile idea of, when we're older, we'll have this family fortune that we can rely upon. And so far, this is not working for them. Instead, it's when you're older, you're going to have more demands on your time and less free time to do fun stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I could not have phrased any of that better. It is so true that that's really what these books are getting into. The fact that they are aging up as the audience is. Very, very well said. And I hadn't, made those connections about work before. But yes, absolutely.
It's the first time we have a mention of a job interview. And
right.
Like, this is right around the age. Like, I mean, I was 15 when I got my first real part-time job. I had jobs before that, like delivering newspapers and selling newspaper subscriptions from door to door, and I sold chocolate door to door. I did some of that stuff from the time that I was literally 12. So I've been working since I was 12, constantly. I've always been working since then. But 15 is when I had my first real job, where I got an hourly wage, and I went to a place and I checked in, like I punched in and punched out, and all of that. And yeah, that first job interview it can be not necessarily, if not an unpleasant experience, at least stressful.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, and then the fact that Snicket has some advice is
And he gives
great.
legitimately good advice, which is strange.
Yeah, yeah,
He
the
says
best
is to be
strategy.
fairly honest.
Hmm. Yeah,
Not
because
not perfectly honest, which I would say
right,
like don't be perfectly honest. Just
right.
go, I don't want to do this, but my parents aren't giving me an allowance anymore. Like,
Yeah.
don't do that.
Yep. Yeah, and as someone who has had trouble looking for work, um, then the mention of you won't get the job and will spend the rest of your life foraging for food in the wilderness and seeking shelter underneath a tree or the awning of a bowling alley that has gone out of business. Yeah, okay. I guess I should start doing
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just consider the alternative. You don't want to work, consider the alternative.
Yeah. Um,
All right, so that's really like all that I had with chapter 2 and chapter 3, and I've only got a brief little note with chapter 4, but I'm sure you're gonna pick up on it anyway. So basically, take it away.
okay. Actually, it looks like that was my main note for chapter 3. It's all
Okay.
that discussion of the job interview and all that. And then on page 74, it's the very last page. Um, uh, yeah, then this is interesting the way that Snicket has written this. Uh, and it happened to Violet, Klaus, and Sunny now, although it was quite some time before they learned that what the hook-handed man said turned out to be something different from what they thought when they heard him outside the door of the freak's caravan. Wake up, and hurry up. I'm in a very bad mood and have no time for your nonsense. It's a very busy day at the carnival. Madame Lulu and Count Olaf are running errands. I'm in charge of the House of Freaks. The crystal ball revealed that one of those blasted Baudelaire parents is still alive, and the gift caravan is almost out of figurines. Um, so he says a lot of things here, but yeah, the way that Snicket describes it as the children will it'll take some time before they learn that the hook-handed man, what he said, turned out to be something different from what they thought.
Hmm.
So just interesting, the phrasing of that, the discussion of that, what specifically in here, because I feel like it has to be about the Baudelaire parents, right?
Yes.
And so then what is it that um, yeah, what is it that he is um, saying that the children are misinterpreting, for lack of a better word?
Hmm.
Um, because that's what it sounds like. That it's
It does.
before they learned that what the hook-handed man said turned out to be something different from what they thought when they heard him.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yep. No, I know. I don't think there's any other way of interpreting that. That the most significant thing that, because, you know, he only says a few things. He says, wake up and hurry up. I'm in a very bad mood and have no time for your nonsense. So what? They misinterpreted that he's in a bad mood, that he's in a good mood. They do have time.
Right.
He does have time for nonsense. It's a very busy day at the carnival. It's not a busy day at the carnival. Madame Lulu and Count Olaf are running errands. They're not running errands, or only one of them is. I'm in charge of the House of Freaks. Okay, he's not. The crystal ball revealed that one of those blasted Baudelaire parents is still alive. One of them is not still alive. I mean, unless like that's the part that like that's got to be the part that like they're misinterpreting, or the gift caravan is almost out of figurines. What? It
Right.
is out of figurines, or it's not even in danger of being. Yeah, that if they're misinterpreting something that he says, one would think it would be the thing about their parents.
Yeah. Um, all right. Um, yeah, so next up is on page 82, moving into chapter 4. Um, let me see. Oh yes, just at the bottom of page 82. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, adolescents of both genders, he announced, this is the hook-handed man, hurry up and buy your delicious cold beverages because the House of Freaks show is about to begin. So the only reason why I have this marked is because I once was corrected in one thing that I wrote in university because I wrote both genders and I was told there's more than two genders. And so, that I was incorrect for writing both genders. And so I just said, "Oh, okay." I
Uh-huh.
mean, I, yeah, I understand, but at the same time, it's,
How
the
quickly our culture has shifted on that?
mhm.
Like, is that what you're saying? Because, like, if you're looking
Yeah.
at this, when was this book published? This book, like, was 2002, maybe?
Uh, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2002. And that he wrote that without an editor. It's a character, right? There's so many
Yeah.
layers of removal. There's
Yeah.
Handler writing as Lemony Snicket, who's maybe documenting accurately what characters within the story have said, and then it's a villainous character and these stories are taking place who knows how long ago, maybe a century ago
Right.
of when the story itself is taking place. So then to have a character say both genders is like it's so far removed from nonfiction, 2020 somebody writing. Um,
Yeah.
but it's definitely one of those things that I don't think any. I think very, very, very few people, and certainly of children who are reading these books, middle grade readers, I dare say, you know, 0% plus, like less than 1% would have had anything, go off when they read both genders.
Yeah.
But now in 2020 in North America,
Hmm.
um, that you can't get away with that without people noticing that it's some kind of comment about sexual identity
Yeah.
issues. Like
Yep.
it's a big shift in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, and it would be a simple rewrite of just writing of all genders, and
Yeah, but he
then
doesn't have to do it because he's a character.
no, I
He's a
know.
character. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you're saying like in your own essay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, of all
Um,
genders or any gender.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you can. It's still controversial, but if you said both sexes,
Yeah. I
there's
know.
there are intersexed individuals, so that does kind of throw that off too. But
Right. Yeah.
gender is performative in a lot of ways, according to um, anybody who studies gender theory. Then it's performative, something that we perform for other people.
Hmm.
Uh, that it's actions that we take, but it's not immutable sexual characteristics that we might have or genetic characteristics. Um,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So it is, I think, interesting that it's ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and then it's adolescents. That
Adolescents of
there's.
both genders. Yeah, because they're not boys and girls. They're not
Mhm.
ladies and gentlemen. They are in between.
Yeah. And I guess that can be sort of a comment on how we don't really have a specific term for male teenagers and female teenagers, but we do for children and for
Yeah.
adults.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, even the idea of being a teenager is a pretty recent invention.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on, page 96. Because we're going to come back to that whole story. Um, I think this is just, yeah, never look a gift lion in the mouth. Um, and it's interesting that he doesn't really give um, a proper, he doesn't give a specific description of this. And I guess this is, just about the story, but because never look a gift horse in the mouth is the, traditional expression. But he doesn't actually say, what it is that the meaning is, that he's just like, yeah, don't look at, like he doesn't spell it out. And I think
No.
that's interesting.
Is it interesting because he's assuming that readers will figure it out, or is it interesting because Snicket just doesn't even know? He doesn't understand what the expression is or the meaning behind it or anything, because he screws up these expressions all the time.
Yeah.
And it just seems like he thinks, like I've said it many times before in this series that we've been doing, he's the kind of stupid person who thinks he's really smart.
Yes.
And he knows just enough that he can kind of fool you until he starts giving illustrations or examples. And then it falls apart. He'll say, you might be wondering about this term that I just used. Because he knows the term. He's smart enough to know the term.
Yeah.
And then he's smart enough to kind of know the meaning of it. But then it's just off. And then you're like,
yeah.
Not quite. You were so close. You know what I mean? He's like a Michael Scott character who's, says something like an N3P player. And, Jim is sitting down and he's just like, that's not right. That's not, you understand what digital music is. You understand that you can have a digital file on some kind of electronic device that will play it for you. I understand that's how people listen to music. But then you called it an N3P instead of an MP3, right? And it's like, it's close, but not quite. That's Lemony Snicket most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think he gets to the end of this and he just doesn't really know what that even means.
Yeah, he's told this whole story and yet still doesn't even really give an ending.
Nope.
Yeah, there's no need to tell you the rest of this story, which has the rather obvious moral, never look a gift lion in the mouth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. That's the thing, is like it's this false confidence that he has in his own intelligence, which is very funny, but I feel like there's this tension in the texts that we constantly have where he's instructing children and giving them these lessons in how to read literature, how to understand different literary devices, plot devices, different phrases and vocabulary and all of these different things as coming of age stories, but you never know when he's getting it right and when he's getting it wrong unless you already know all of these things before you read the books.
Yeah, so I think that with this example in particular, then it really it's not about the specific expression of never look a gift horse in the mouth, but that it is about, I guess, trying to find the story behind these expressions that seem so, nonsensical, that you can actually look it up and be like, oh, there's a whole story here, which explains why this is an expression. Right. And it doesn't make sense unless you know the full story behind it, which is true. There are many expressions that I still look up because I'm like, why in the world do we say that? And then it's a really interesting story.
Right. That's true. That is true. Yeah. Okay. So he's trying to invent this history of it?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe he just found that the actual background of a gift horse was not as entertaining. I don't know.
I mean, like, but it's on the surface.
Anyway.
What do you mean, like the story of it? It's on the surface. It's that you can tell a lot from a horse's health by looking in its mouth, looking at its teeth. That's one of the big things that's a huge indicator of health for horses. So if you want to do any kind of medical checkup on a horse, and you look at the teeth. But of course, if you give somebody a horse, it'd be very rude of the person to then immediately start looking at the teeth, because it's like, you can't be grateful for the fact that I gave you a free horse. You got to see how good a shape it's in. Like, that's a really rude. That's ingratitude. That's just on the surface. Yeah. I don't know, like.
Well, but see, I didn't even know the story behind that.
Okay, I guess. Like, that's the thing. But I'm saying, but it's not a story. It's just the literal definition of Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not a story. Like, that's just it. It's
Right.
that,
Yeah.
like, it's not like it happened one time. It's that people would give horses,
Yes.
and that it's just everybody understands to check a horse to see its overall health. You look in its mouth to look at its teeth to see if there's gum disease and things like that, and you can tell a lot about how good a shape it's in as a result. And since everybody until the 20th century, if they were traveling, like everybody in, you know, Europe or North America, if they were traveling any distance overland, then it was by horse. Like,
Right.
even if they didn't own horses, then they would pay to get on, you know, like a stagecoach or something like that to travel. And so people knew horses, just like they know cars now.
Right.
Like, the expression would just be like, you know, if somebody like gives you a free car because you don't have a car, like, don't like start asking, well, how many miles does it have?
Or don't look under the hood of a
Yeah.
gift car.
Yeah.
Gifted car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I think, was my only other note for these chapters.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought I had more notes, but
That's fine.
Yeah.
Because I had a note with that same section that you were mentioning. I just think that it's interesting. I don't think it's as clever or entertaining or as interesting as he thinks that it is. It's a long way to go to get a weird joke that's not really that funny. But I think what I find more interesting is this false history that he's giving, where he's using very much the at least the font of a fairy tale, of what you'd see in, like, you know, Grimm's fairy tales or any kind of folk story. The font is very much reminiscent of that, the aesthetic of it, but the actual content does not match the form at all. And so he's trying very hard to use the form of fairy tales, including some, like, invoking some language and invoking the font of fairy tales, like, you know, the story of Queen Debbie, and then, like, this is where it goes off, and her boyfriend Tony, right? That it starts out and you're like, oh, it sounds like a fairy tale. Oh no, it's so casual, it's not. And then once upon a time, there lived a fictional queen named Queen Debbie who ruled over the land where the story takes place. Blah 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 blah. And then he starts getting into, like, really informal stuff immediately.
I mean, even the name Debbie is,
yes,
you know, a short form for Deborah, or at least
That's
originated that way. And even Tony, you know, short for
Anthony.
Anthony, Antonio, whatever you want, depending on which background you're in. So it is a more casual story, or version of this story, which is already fictional.
But he's trying to make it a fairy tale and to invoke that aesthetic. But he's failing, like, at every turn. That he's got enough of an understanding of what it should be that he's coming close. But, like, this is essentially what would happen, I think, if you got, like, most middle grade readers, if you told them to write a fairy tale. It would have some of that. It would be once upon a time, but it would get pretty informal pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah.
For most of them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean,
occasionally they would go out to dinner and a movie or do other fictional things together.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I do think that it is an interesting passage, and it is a long walk, but but I think that he's having fun with it, and I think that kids will.
He's
really
enjoying himself. I do not doubt that Daniel Handler really enjoyed this.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess, like, part of the interesting thing is I don't know how often we've seen it in the text so far, like in any of these books, where we get a different font and we get a different passage like this. I think we've had that maybe with a couple, like, notes or journal entries, but nothing quite like this, because this is outside of the story and it's now turning into intertextuality, but it's a fictional text that he's pulling in.
Right. Yeah, and we do, of course, you know, have him, you know, mentioning Here I must interrupt the story I am writing and tell you another story in order to make an important point. This second story is fictional, a word which here means somebody made it up one day, as opposed to the story of the Baudelaire orphans, which somebody merely wrote down, usually at night. So he's again, addressing the fact that these are definitely true events. This is a real story.
Exactly.
Compared
And
to
how do you
this
know it's
other one.
true? Because
Yeah.
this one's fiction.
Right.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and it's very much, I think I mentioned it a couple weeks ago that when we were talking about restoration literature, but this is very much what you would see in Tristram Shandy, that by Lawrence Stern, that he would say, I have to interrupt my story in order to tell you this other story, that
Right.
just hang on a minute while I give you this whole other story, that it's very much in that style of, and it's a playfulness in the text that it either works for you or it doesn't, but it's definitely very representative of what Handler's doing with this series. It's a
Yes.
good example. If you wanted to kind of get a sense of how these books are ironic, then
Yeah.
that'd be a good passage to point to.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. All right. So I guess moving on to the next 4 chapters then.
Yeah, we'll move on to the next 4 chapters. I mean, I guess the only thing that we haven't talked about that is fairly interesting is just the freaks, the so-called freaks that you have in this story, and the way you just do freakish things for people to entertain them, and there's some kind of commentary going on here. I don't quite know what to make of it, because
Yeah,
go
it's
ahead.
interesting. I was kind of thinking about it, and we have the contortionist who, chooses to continue
Yes.
conforming her body. We have the ambidextrous person who, chooses to use both hands equally. But then we have uh, the hunchback, and I'm blanking on all of their names right now.
Yeah.
Um, but the hunchback is the more cheerful of the three,
Yes.
and yet he is the only
Hugo.
Hugo. That's right.
Of course it
Yes.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, and he has the most positive attitude. He, yeah, I don't know. It's strange. Not strange, but it's interesting that the two people who can control more or less their freakish nature are the ones who are complaining about having to be bogged down by this, horrible thing. Whereas the one who is visibly deformed is the one who's just like, this is just the way I am, and I can't do anything about it. And, he
Yeah.
still stays positive.
Yeah, there's a a lot going on with that. And you are right. I don't even know what it is
Hmm.
that Handler's trying to say as a commentary on this.
Yeah.
Uh, I just wanted to point out the reason why I'm saying, of course, his name is Hugo, just in case anybody is wondering about this, is because The Hunchback of Notre Dame is written by Victor Hugo.
Right.
So that's why
Yes.
the Hunchback would be Hugo, because Hugo wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But the other ones, it's like, yeah, it's a very obvious thing of just don't do those things. Nobody would ever know that you're freakish in that way. But I
Mhm.
think it's also what Madame Lulu says is give the people whatever they want, that there's a
Right.
certain amount of entering the world of work, even if you don't like a particular skill that you have and it doesn't make you happy, but if that's what people are willing to pay you for, then do it.
Yeah.
Um, if that's how you can make money, then, just swallow your pride. And it doesn't matter if you're ashamed of it. And it doesn't matter that, you feel crappy during the day and then you come home at night and you're not proud of how you earned your money, but at least you made a living. Because
Hmm.
what are the alternatives? That it seems to be some kind of really dark commentary on entering the world of work. That's what the essentially the free market demands is it's not going to provide you a job unless you are willing to fulfill a need that society has, in which somebody will freely choose to pay you money for something that you are producing, whether it's a service or a product or whatever else. That
Right.
You might not like it, but swallow your pride and do whatever it takes to go out and earn money. And that it seems to be this dark commentary on it, but without really offering a solution. Because it's saying for these people, like, what should they do? Like, well, just don't let people see that you're ambidextrous. And then the idea is, well, how else is you going to earn money? Don't let people see that you can contort your body. Well, how else are you going to earn your money? You know? And I don't know. I'm puzzled over what's going on with these so-called freaks in the story, and the fact that two of them do not have, like, well, two of them, it's not even any kind of disability, right? Yeah. But the third one, Hugo, who does have a hunched back, then you go, okay, so that's a type of physical like deformity, for lack of a better word, like that it's an abnormal development of the back. But that's still, like, I'm saying, I don't even know how much of it is a disability, because I don't think he's disabled from doing certain things, that he can't do things. So I don't know what's going on with it.
No, I agree. I think that there is definitely something there, and possibly we'll get more as the story continues. But
yeah, I guess I'm just saying there doesn't seem to be much alternative, because you could say, if you don't like how you're earning money, then go and do something different. And it seems to be almost this bleak response of, but this is the only way that I can earn money. That I don't know what hope that offers for somebody who is entering the world of work, or has been in the world of work for a period of time, and they're just unhappy with how they spend most of their day and how they feel at the end of the day. And then the response just seems to be homelessness, or that you can't find fulfillment in how you earn money. That it's like, that's pretty dark if that's his attitude. That you just have to kind of accept it, like Hugo, of, I can't change my appearance, so I'll just embrace the fact that people want to laugh at me, because at least I'm earning money. But I don't know. I'm just saying that if your job makes you miserable, then surely there's got to be better options than just continue doing it.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just wondering if Handler's got anything else that he's, or Snicket at the very least, like, because I think you have the kids are entering the misery of the world of work. Oh no, here's a job interview. And then you see these people who've been at it for a while, and it's like, well, that seems like a miserable way to make a living. And they're like, yeah, but what can we do? That this all seems to be like, you don't want to grow up and become an adult and start working, because it just sucks overall.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because then, of course, we do have Olaf, who appears to be, continuously trying to steal money from others.
Correct.
And who is portrayed as this childish person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Who refuses to grow up, who, like, he wipes his nose on the curtains.
Right.
The henchman that he works with, right? His associates, like the hook-handed man who is constantly asking, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" in the car. All of them are depicted as being very immature.
Yeah, Esme quits her job as being the sixth most successful financial advisor or something like that in that town, in order to become Olaf's full-time girlfriend. That becomes her role. I quit my job and I'm now retired, and so that way I can be Olaf's girlfriend.
Yeah.
It's all very childish. It's all very much, we are going to avoid the world of work because it's not fun working, and then we want something for nothing, so we're going to steal other people's hard-earned money. I mean, at least in the case of the orphans, it's not hard-earned money, but it's their parents or their grandparents or whoever in the family initially earned it. Somebody earned that money. That I'm going to go and steal somebody else's fortune, so that way I can continue to be essentially a nefarious Peter Pan.
Right. No, absolutely.
It's just, I'm saying, what are the alternatives that Handler's really offering here? Because it seems like you don't want to be Olaf, but you also don't want to be one of these people working in this carnival.
Right.
Like, what well-adjusted adult do we have as any kind of role model in these books?
Mr. Poe.
Right. There's Mr. Poe, who's terrible. The only one I can think is maybe going back to book one with Judge Strauss.
Oh,
She
yes,
seemed
Justice
cool.
Strauss. Yeah.
Yeah, Justice Strauss.
Yeah.
She seemed like she mostly had her life together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true.
She like had her garden that she was happy tending, and she had a nice library and a nice, well-maintained home. She didn't seem to hate her life and her job. She kind of yearned for children, as best we could tell. Like, there was subtle hints of that, but like,
I mean, she said that she doesn't like reading, the law
stuff.
books, but
Yeah. but it doesn't sound like it's miserable where she goes
Right.
into work, it's being mocked and people are throwing stuff at her. It's just kind of like, it's not the best job, but she at least has got other pursuits. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's got her garden, she's got her library, and she doesn't work all the time. And she's not living in abject poverty like most people, like at the miserable mill, working for coupons and gum, or in this, like, where they get no pay at all. Because this dude, like, or Madame Lulu says, like, of course I'm not going to pay you. You're freaks. You can't earn anything.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. And I think that's why, part of why I had, mentioned before, that it feels kind of Depression era.
Yes. That there's just not a lot of work opportunities, so take what you can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially because we're out in, like, what do they call it?
The hinterlands.
Hinterlands.
Yeah.
But, like, essentially being out on the Great Plains, where the Great Depression hit people most profoundly.
Yeah. Yeah. For
so
sure.
Maybe that's where it's coming from, too. Because I think you're right. All right. Let's finish with that. Are you good?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. We'll move on to the next 4 chapters.
Yeah.
And see what happens with these lions.
Yeah, because the lions just showed up and you can't look them in the mouth.
Right.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for watching. And so chapters 5 to 8 in the Carnivorous Carnival, book the 9th for next week. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.